They thought she was gone forever. When her A-10 was struck mid-mission, radar lost her signal, and Admiral Lockhart declared her KIA. The base went silent, military protocol masking the grief as another pilot's name was added to the growing casualty list. But war allows no time for mourning when you're losing. Then came the impossible transmission that changed everything. Sierra 7, requesting emergency landing protocol. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? Let us know in the comments and subscribe if you enjoy stories of those who refuse to be defined by their limitations. Lieutenant Commander Astria Calloway could feel their stares as she moved through the maintenance hangar. 3 months of being grounded had turned her into a ghost on her own base. A ghost with a nickname that followed her through the corridors of Naval Air Station Fallon like a shadow. Phantom. The mechanics fell silent as she passed, then resumed their conversations in hushed tones. She pretended not to notice, keeping her eyes fixed on the neural interface diagrams displayed on her tablet. The year was 2037, and America was losing a war that had rewritten the rules of aerial combat. The coalition's drone swarms had decimated conventional air forces across 3 continents. Human pilots were becoming obsolete against an enemy whose artificial intelligence could outthink, outmaneuver, and outfight even the best Top Gun graduates. Only the A-10 Warthogs remained relevant on the modern battlefield, their heavy armor and relatively primitive electronics making them resistant to the coalition's electronic warfare tactics. They flew dangerous close support missions where the electronic battlefield was too intense for more advanced aircraft. Astria paused at the far end of the hangar, her eyes drawn to her A-10. Maintenance crews had repaired the physical damage after her last mission, but the aircraft remained grounded like its pilot. She traced a finger along a newly replaced panel, feeling a phantom pain in her own side that made no logical sense. The hangar intercom crackled. All flight personnel report to Briefing Room Alpha. Immediate attendance required. The briefing room was filled with tension when Astria arrived. She took a seat in the back row, away from the other pilots. Admiral Thaddeus Lockhart stood at the front, his weathered face grim beneath the harsh fluorescent lighting. The holographic display behind him showed the remains of what had once been America's proudest carrier group. "Half our fleet lost in 72 hours, he said without preamble. The coalition has deployed a new generation of autonomous weapons. Our electronic countermeasures are ineffective. We are deploying with half our usual squadron complement." Murmurs rippled through the assembled pilots. Deployment orders appeared on their tablets. Astria stared at hers in disbelief. Tactical analyst, not pilot, grounded. As the briefing ended and pilots filed out to prepare, Astria remained seated, staring at the assignment that felt like a personal indictment. She had once been their best pilot. Now she was a liability, a risk too great to take. "Lieutenant Commander," the voice belonged to Dr. Ezria Vauclin, the flight surgeon who had been monitoring Astria since the incident. Her accent carried traces of her French Creole heritage, softening the clinical precision of her words. A moment, Astria reluctantly followed the doctor to a quieter corner of the now empty briefing room. Dr. Vauclin's dark eyes studied her with unsettling intensity. "Your latest neural scans show activity patterns I've never seen before," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "The patterns match nothing in medical literature. What really happened up there, Astria? During those 37 minutes when you disappeared?" Astria felt her right hand begin to tremble, an involuntary movement that had started after the incident. She shoved it into her pocket. "You've read my report." "I've read a report." Dr. Vauclin's gaze never wavered. "I don't believe it's the truth, not the whole truth." "Then we have nothing to discuss." Astria moved to leave, but the doctor's next words froze her in place. "The neural interface system in your helmet wasn't standard issue, was it?" Astria's pulse quickened. How much did Vauclin know? How much had they told her? "I fly what they give me, doctor." Interesting choice of present tense. Dr. Vauclin smiled thinly. "You haven't flown in 3 months. Astria left without responding, her stride purposeful, as she navigated the labyrinthian corridors of the base. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched to the horizon, its vast emptiness a stark contrast to the crowded thoughts in her mind. She had told them everything she could remember about those 37 minutes when her A-10 had vanished from radar. The problem was, her memories didn't make sense. Not to them, not even to herself. That night in her quarters, sleep came reluctantly and brought with it the dreams that had haunted her since the incident. She was flying, but not in any conventional sense. Her consciousness extended beyond her body, sensing air currents and thermodynamic variations, as if they were extensions of her nervous system. She could feel the metal skin of the aircraft as intimately as her own, could redirect hydraulic systems with the same instinctive ease as flexing a muscle. She woke gasping, a familiar warmth trickling from her nose. Blood. Astria grabbed a tissue from beside her bed, a habit formed over months of these episodes. As she stanched the flow, she found herself whispering coordinates she didn't consciously recognize, numbers and vectors that belonged to no mission she had ever been briefed on. The dreams were becoming more frequent, more vivid, and something else was happening, something she had told no one, not even Dr. Vauclin. Sometimes, walking past electronic systems on the base, she could feel them. Not just be aware of them, but feel them, as if they were extensions of her body just slightly out of reach. Yesterday, passing the communications array, she had experienced a momentary sense of expanding outward, connecting to a network of satellites and distant signals. It had lasted only seconds before she had pulled herself back, terrified of what it might mean. What had that experimental neural interface done to her? And why couldn't she bring herself to tell anyone about these growing abilities? Dawn broke over the desert with an eerie red glow that the more superstitious members of the base would have called a warning. Astria had been awake for hours, reviewing everything she could access about neural interface technology. The information available to her security clearance was frustratingly limited, full of redactions and technical jargon that obscured more than it revealed. The blaring of alarms shattered the morning stillness. Astria was on her feet instantly, muscle memory from years of combat readiness taking over. The base-wide announcement system activated with a burst of static. Alert Status Alpha. Coalition forces have launched a surprise attack on Carrier Group 7. All flight personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. Astria was moving before the announcement finished, joining the stream of personnel flooding toward the hangars. In the organized chaos of a base transitioning to combat operations, she found herself on the flight line almost without conscious decision, drawn toward her A-10 as if by magnetic force. Admiral Lockhart's voice cut through the cacophony of alarms and engines. All available pilots to stations. Emergency Protocol Sierra 7 activated. Astria stopped dead in her tracks. Sierra 7. That had been her call sign, officially retired after the incident. Emergency Protocol Sierra 7 was a contingency plan for situations where conventional tactics had failed, where desperate measures became necessary. It was named after her because she had authored it during her tactical analysis work, never expecting it to be implemented. She changed direction, heading for her A-10 with renewed purpose. If they were activating Sierra 7, the situation was dire beyond normal parameters. They needed every pilot, even the grounded ones. A security team intercepted her halfway to her aircraft. Lieutenant Commander Calloway, you are restricted from flight operations. Admiral's orders. You heard the announcement, Sierra 7 protocol. Every pilot. Astria tried to push past them, but they held firm. Medical restriction trumps combat protocol. Stand down, Commander. Astria felt a familiar sensation building at the base of her skull, a pressure that had preceded every episode since the incident. Electronic systems around the flight line flickered momentarily, communications headsets emitting bursts of static. The security team's radios squawked with interference. That's enough. Admiral Lockhart's voice cut through the tension. He approached with the brisk stride of a man accustomed to crisis management. Calloway, you're grounded for a reason. Medical restriction based on your last neural scan. We can't risk a repeat of what happened. Sir, with respect, you're activating my protocol. You know what that means. The situation is beyond critical. And that's precisely why I can't risk you in the air, not in your condition. What condition? Dr. Vauclin's voice surprised them all. She approached with a tablet in hand, her lab coat fluttering in the downdraft from departing aircraft. I've reviewed her latest neural scan. The anomalies are still present, but they've stabilized. The Admiral's expression hardened. Doctor, we discussed this. The risk assessment was clear. That was before coalition forces launched a direct attack on our carrier group. Dr. Vauclin held out her tablet, displaying what appeared to be a brain scan overlaid with complex metrics. Whatever happened before, We need every pilot now. Astria watched the silent battle of wills between the Admiral and the Doctor. Something unspoken passed between them, some knowledge she wasn't privy to. Finally, Lockhart's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. On your head be it, Doctor. If she shows any signs of the previous symptoms, you ground her immediately. He turned to Astria. You fly straight support missions only, no heroics, no deviations. At the first sign of abnormal readings, you return to base. Is that understood, Commander? Perfectly, sir. Astria felt a surge of something between excitement and fear. Flying again after 3 months grounded should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like stepping back into a mystery she had only begun to unravel. As the Admiral walked away, Dr. Vauclain pressed something into Astria's hand, a data chip, small enough to be concealed in her palm. Upload this to your neural interface before takeoff, she whispered, her expression unreadable. What is it? Insurance. The doctor's eyes darted toward the Admiral's retreating figure. They didn't tell you everything about the interface system, neither did I, but you deserve to know what's happening to you. Before Astria could question her further, Dr. Vauclain was walking away, leaving her with the data chip and a decision that might change everything. Around her, pilots raced to their aircraft, the sky already darkening with the approaching storm of combat. In minutes, she would be among them, back where she belonged. But at what cost? The data chip felt impossibly heavy in her hand as she made her way toward her A-10, toward answers she wasn't sure she was ready to find. Astria's A-10 roared to life beneath her, the familiar vibrations traveling up through her flight suit and into her bones. The neural interface helmet sealed around her head with a pneumatic hiss, display systems activating in a cascade of light across her field of vision. For a moment, she hesitated, the data chip Dr. Vauclain had given her still clutched in her hand. Whatever was on this chip might explain what had happened to her during those missing 37 minutes, what was still happening to her. Or it might be another layer of deception. Trust had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Decision made, she slotted the chip into the auxiliary data port on her neural interface. The effect was immediate and disorienting. Additional data streams overlaid her standard heads-up display, information flowing at a rate that should have been impossible to process. Yet somehow, she could track it all, as if parts of her brain previously dormant had awakened to accommodate the influx. Sierra 7, you are cleared for takeoff. The flight controller's voice carried an undertone of uncertainty, as if they weren't convinced she should be in the air. Astria gunned the engines in response, her A-10 surging forward with a throaty roar that drowned out her doubts. As the aircraft lifted from the runway, she experienced a moment of perfect clarity, her consciousness expanding outward to encompass the machine around her. Not just awareness of its systems, but integration with them. The sensation lasted only seconds before receding, leaving her gasping. What had Dr. Vauclain's chip done? Unlocked something that was already happening to her, or accelerated the process? No time to analyze now. Her squadron was forming up ahead, led by Major Octavia Wulfric, call sign Valkyrie. Astria slid her A-10 into formation, ignoring the chatter on the comm channel that fell silent at her arrival. Phantoms flying again? Who authorized that? A voice she recognized as Lieutenant Kearns. Stow it, Kearns. Major Wulfric's voice brooked no argument. We've got a carrier group under attack and civilians in the evacuation zone. Focus on the mission, not the roster. The flight to the combat zone took 18 minutes, each one stretching Astria's nerves tighter. The data streams from Vauclain's chip continued to flow across her vision, revealing patterns and coalition movements that would have been invisible otherwise. She could see the logic behind their attack formation, predict their next vectors with unsettling accuracy. Multiple bogies at bearing 179er, Wulfric announced. Spread formation, weapons hot. Remember your training, people. These aren't standard drones. The Coalition's new autonomous weapons appeared on Astria's enhanced display before they registered on standard sensors. She watched their approach with a strange detachment, seeing not just their current positions, but calculating their probable movements in a cascade of predictive analytics. Phantom, stay on mission profile. Admiral Lockhart's voice cut through the tactical channel. Support role only. Acknowledge. Astria's hand tightened on the control stick. The Admiral was watching her specifically, waiting for any sign of the behavior that had grounded her. Acknowledged. Command. Support role confirmed. The first engagement erupted with the chaotic intensity of modern air combat. Coalition drones moved with inhuman precision, their targeting algorithms identifying and attacking the most vulnerable elements of the human squadron. 2 A-10s went down in the first 3 minutes, their pilots ejecting into the turbulent airspace below. Through it all, Astria flew with uncanny precision, her aircraft moving as if it were an extension of her will rather than a machine responding to physical controls. She felt bullet impacts against the A-10's armored hull as phantom pain across her own body, winced at near misses that scraped paint from the wings. "Phantom, what's your status?" Major Wulfric's voice carried concern beneath its professional calm. "Your flight pattern is irregular." Astria realized she had been flying on instinct, following patterns suggested by the enhanced data streams rather than standard combat protocol. "Green status, Valkyrie, adjusting approach. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Your hit ratio is off the charts." The battle intensified as they approached the carrier group. The sea below was littered with debris from destroyed ships, lifeboats filled with survivors struggling through oil-slicked waters. Astria felt a surge of anger at the sight, her focus sharpening to crystalline clarity. A warning flashed across her display. Coalition jamming signals had suddenly intensified, electromagnetic pulses designed to disrupt communications and targeting systems. The squadron's formation broke apart as pilots lost contact with each other, their coordination fragmenting under the electronic assault. "Sierra Squadron, fall back to Rally Point Delta," Admiral Lockhart ordered, his voice breaking through intermittent static. "Repeat, fall back to Rally Point Delta. Coalition reinforcements detected." Major Wulfric's acknowledgement was cut short by an explosion that rocked her aircraft. Astria watched in horror as the Major's A-10 spiraled downward, smoke pouring from its starboard engine. "Valkyrie is hit!" Kearns shouted. "She's losing altitude fast!" Astria didn't hesitate. Banking her A-10 into a steep dive, she dropped below the cloud layer, pursuing Wulfric's damaged aircraft. The jamming was worse at lower altitude, her communications reduced to bursts of static and fragmented words. But the neural interface continued functioning, its enhanced data streams seemingly immune to the Coalition's electronic warfare. She caught sight of Wulfric's A-10 just as a medical evacuation helicopter approached from the carrier group below. The Major had managed to stabilize her descent, but Coalition drones were already vectoring toward the vulnerable aircraft. "Command, this is Phantom. Valkyrie is hit but stable. Medevac approaching her position, requesting permission to provide cover." The response was lost in a burst of static. Astria made her decision anyway, swinging her A-10 into a protective position between the approaching drones and the evacuation operation. What followed was combat at its most elemental, a single pilot against overwhelming odds. The neural interface hummed against her temples as Astria pushed her aircraft beyond its designed capabilities. She felt herself slipping into that strange state again, her consciousness expanding to fill the systems around her. The A-10 responded to her thoughts as much as her physical inputs, anticipating maneuvers before she could complete them. For precious minutes, she held the line alone, giving the medevac time to retrieve Wulfric from her damaged aircraft. But the Coalition had noticed her effectiveness. They adjusted their tactics, focusing their fire on her specifically. The first hit shattered her port stabilizer. The second punched through the cockpit, depressurizing the cabin in an explosive rush of air. The neural interface flickered, connection weakening as systems failed around her. Warnings blared across her display, some silenced mid-alert as their associated systems went offline. Astria fought to maintain control, blood from a head wound trickling into her eyes. The A-10 shuddered beneath her, more machine than aircraft now, as the third hit took out her starboard wing entirely. Physics and aerodynamics agreed on the impossibility of her situation. The aircraft should not have been capable of remaining airborne, yet somehow she stayed aloft. The neural interface pulsed with renewed intensity, the data chip's enhancements flowing through her consciousness like electricity through a conductor. She felt the aircraft's damage as her own, rerouted power through systems that should have been incompatible, compensated for the missing wing through adjustments that defied conventional aviation principles. In the command center at Naval Air Station Fallon, Admiral Lockhart watched Astria's transponder signal flicker and die. "Sierra 7 is down," a communications officer reported, voice flat with the practiced neutrality of someone delivering bad news. Last transmission showed catastrophic system failure. The command center fell silent. Even in a war where death had become commonplace, the loss of a pilot like Astria Calloway left a void. Her troubled history and mysterious grounding had made her an outsider, but her skill had never been in question. "Time of loss?" Lockhart asked, protocol masking the emotion beneath. 1437 local time, sir. Coalition jamming prevented any distress signal. The Admiral nodded once. Add her to the casualty report. Full honors. As the command center resumed its grim business, Dr. Ezria Vauclin slipped away unnoticed. She made her way to her private laboratory, fingers trembling slightly as she entered the security code. Inside, away from surveillance, she activated a specialized communications array and transmitted a brief, encrypted message. Integration complete, separation event triggered, monitoring for re-emergence. In the skies above, the Pacific, what remained of Astria's A-10, plummeted toward the ocean. Inside the shattered cockpit, the neural interface flared with unnatural light. Astria's consciousness, untethered from normal awareness, dispersed throughout the aircraft's systems, like electricity seeking ground. For 37 minutes, radar showed no sign of Sierra 7. The battle moved on, coalition forces pressing their advantage against the diminished American squadron. The carrier group completed its emergency evacuation. Thousands of personnel transferred to safer vessels as their ships burned. Back at Fallon, Dr. Vauclin accessed a secure terminal, bypassing standard security protocols with an authorization code that shouldn't have existed in the system. The files she pulled up were classified beyond her official clearance level, marked with designations even Admiral Lockhart wasn't authorized to view. Project Phantom Wing. The military's desperate attempt to counter the coalition's technological advantage by creating something beyond conventional warfare, beyond traditional definitions of pilot and aircraft. Neural integration on a scale never before attempted, merging human intuition with machine precision. The file listed 7 test subjects. 6 marked as failed, their minds unable to handle the integration process. Brain death or insanity, the only outcomes. The 7th, added recently, showed Astria's service photo, her status marked as active integration monitoring. They had selected her specifically, Dr. Vauclin realized. Her unique neurological profile had made her the perfect candidate, a rare individual whose brain architecture allowed for deeper machine integration than any pilot previously tested. They had installed the experimental neural interface without her knowledge, disguised as a standard equipment upgrade. What they hadn't anticipated was how completely the integration would take. Astria hadn't just interfaced with her aircraft during that first incident. She had begun merging with it on a fundamental level. The missing 37 minutes, the memory gaps, the strange abilities afterward, all symptoms of a process that continued even when she was physically separated from the A-10. And now, with the enhanced data chip Vauclin had provided, that process had accelerated beyond their predictions. The doctor's hands hovered over the keyboard, uncertain. Should she alert Lockhart? Would it make any difference now? Her decision was interrupted by a communications officer bursting into the lab without knocking. "Doctor, you're needed in the command center immediately." "What's happened?" The officer's expression combined disbelief and urgency. "We're receiving a transmission from Sierra 7. Admiral Lockhart stood rigidly before the main display when Vauclin arrived, his face ashen in the blue glow of the screens. Around him, technicians worked with frantic energy, trying to clean up the garbled signal being received. "This is impossible," Lockhart muttered. "We lost her transponder over an hour ago. The aircraft was destroyed." "Satellite imagery coming through now, sir," a technician announced. The main screen flickered, then resolved to show a cloud-shrouded section of ocean. As they watched, something broke through the dense cloud layer. The image clarified, resolution improving with each second. A collective gasp rippled through the command center. The aircraft that emerged was barely recognizable as an A-10. One wing completely gone, massive bullet holes punched through its fuselage, smoke trailing from wounds that should have been fatal to any conventional aircraft. It wasn't flying so much as controlled falling, defying aerodynamics through sheer impossibility. The garbled transmission cleared momentarily, a voice emerging from static. Sierra 7, requesting emergency landing protocol. Dr. Vauclin stepped forward, her voice hushed but carrying in the stunned silence of the command center. It's not just the aircraft that's coming back, Admiral. The question is, what's piloting it? And how much of Astria Calloway remains inside? The impossible landing unfolded in excruciating detail. Every person at Naval Air Station Fallon, from the highest-ranking officer to the newest recruit, stood witness to what could only be described as a miracle or a nightmare, depending on one's perspective. The critically damaged A-10, more wreckage than aircraft, approached the runway with movements that defied conventional physics. It listed heavily to one side, compensating for its missing wing through micro-adjustments that the base's most experienced pilots immediately recognized as beyond human capability. "Clear the runway," Admiral Lockhart ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "Emergency response teams in position. Everyone else, maintain distance." The aircraft's landing gear deployed, though only partially. Metal shrieked against concrete as the A-10 made contact with the runway, sending sparks flying 30 feet into the air. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of grinding metal and failing systems that continued for nearly half a mile as the wreckage skidded to an eventual halt. Silence fell across the base, broken only by the hiss of fire suppression systems activating around the smoking heap. For long seconds, nothing moved. Then, with a mechanical groan, the cockpit began to open. Emergency response teams advanced cautiously, weapons drawn alongside medical equipment. No one knew what to expect. The aircraft had sustained damage that should have killed any pilot instantly. The fact that the cockpit was opening at all defied explanation. A figure emerged slowly from the shattered canopy. Lieutenant Commander Astria Calloway, her flight suit torn and bloodied, helmet still secured around her head. The neural interface's connections remained intact, thin filaments disappearing beneath the surface of the helmet where they interfaced directly with her neural pathways. She stood unsteadily on the broken wing of her aircraft, surveying the crowd of stunned onlookers with eyes that seemed to focus beyond them, taking in information invisible to normal human perception. Then, with deliberate ceremony, she raised her hand in a perfect military salute, directed specifically at Admiral Lockhart. The base remained frozen in collective shock as medical teams finally rushed forward, helping her down from the wreckage. Dr. Vauclin pushed through the crowd, medical scanner already active in her hands. "Don't remove the helmet," Astria said, her voice hoarse but commanding. "Not yet. We need to assess your injuries," a medic protested. "Trust me," Astria replied with quiet authority. "Removing it incorrectly could cause permanent neural damage. Dr. Vauclin knows the protocol." The doctor nodded confirmation, her expression a complex mixture of scientific fascination and moral uncertainty. "She's right. The neural interface requires specialized disconnection procedures." She turned to Astria, scanner displaying readings that made her eyes widen. "These patterns, they're unlike anything I've ever seen. Your entire neural architecture has been reconfigured." "Not reconfigured," Astria corrected. "Expanded." She turned to Admiral Lockhart, who had approached with caution. "We need to talk, Admiral, about Project Phantom Wing, about what you did to me, and about what's coming next." The medical bay transformed into an impromptu command center as senior officers gathered to hear Astria's debriefing. Her helmet had been removed following Dr. Vauclin's careful procedures, revealing a network of fine scars around her temples, where the neural interface had established permanent connections. Medical scans projected on wall displays showed her brain activity, patterns flowing in configurations that defied conventional neurology. "Start from the beginning," Admiral Lockhart instructed, his tone suggesting he was still in control of the situation, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. "The beginning was 3 months ago," Astria replied, sitting perfectly still on the examination table. "When you authorized the installation of an experimental neural interface in my helmet without my knowledge or consent." Murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. Lockhart's expression hardened. "That's classified information, Commander." "Not to me, not anymore." Astria's eyes flicked to one of the medical displays, and the image changed without anyone touching the controls. Several officers stepped back in alarm. The interface was designed to enhance pilot response times by creating a direct neural connection to aircraft systems. What you didn't anticipate was that for someone with my specific neural architecture, the connection would become something more, something permanent. Dr. Vauclin stepped forward, tablet in hand. She's right. Her brain is uniquely structured to form deep technological connections. Among all the candidates screened for Project Phantom Wing, her compatibility rating was exponentially higher. You knew? Astria asked, a flicker of betrayal crossing her features. Not initially, the doctor admitted. I was brought in after your first incident to monitor the neural changes. What I found concerned me enough to dig deeper into classified files. The data chip I gave you contained information about the project and a program designed to protect your core consciousness during full integration events. Admiral Lockhart crossed his arms defensively. The project was necessary. The Coalition's technological advantage was insurmountable through conventional means. We needed to evolve our approach. By turning pilots into lab rats, Major Wulfric spoke from the doorway, her arm in a sling from her recent evacuation. How many others were there before Calloway? Dr. Vauclin answered when the Admiral remained silent. 6, all failed integration, brain death or complete psychotic break in every case. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Astria stood slowly from the examination table, her movements precise and deliberate. What happened today wasn't a malfunction, she said, addressing the entire room but focusing on Lockhart. It was an evolution of the process you started. When my A-10 was critically damaged, the neural interface activated a deeper integration protocol than ever before. For 37 minutes, I wasn't simply connected to the aircraft. I became the aircraft. She walked to the nearest computer terminal, placing her hand near it without touching the screen. The display responded instantly, showing flight data and damage reports from her A-10. My consciousness distributed throughout its systems. I felt bullet impacts as personal injuries. I rerouted hydraulics like redirecting blood flow. I kept a mortally wounded machine in the air through sheer will because the boundary between pilot and aircraft had dissolved completely. The demonstration sent another wave of uneasy murmurs through the room. Admiral Lockhart stepped forward, his authoritative demeanor somewhat diminished in the face of capabilities he couldn't control. The question now, he said carefully, is what this means for our war effort, and for you, Commander. Astria's response was interrupted by the base-wide alarm system activating. A communications officer burst into the medical bay, expression grim. Coalition forces have launched another attack, sir. This one specifically targeting our position. New electronic warfare signatures detected, unlike anything we've encountered before. Tactical displays throughout the base updated with incoming data, showing a massive coalition force approaching with unprecedented coordination. Officers rushed to battle stations as Admiral Lockhart issued rapid orders for base defense. They know, Astria said quietly, drawing their attention back. They detected the anomaly during my return flight. This attack is specifically designed to neutralize the human-machine hybrid they observed. Dr. Vauclin's scanner beeped with new readings. Your neural patterns are shifting again. The separation from the aircraft interface is destabilizing your integrated consciousness. Then there's only one solution. Astria turned to Admiral Lockhart. I need to fly again. Out of the question, he responded immediately. Your aircraft is destroyed, and you're in no condition to pilot another. I don't need an intact aircraft. I need an A-10 with a functional neural interface system. The physical damage is irrelevant to the integration process. She looked around at the stunned faces surrounding her. You created this situation, Admiral. Now you need to trust what you've created. Dr. Vauclin stepped between them. Another full integration could permanently alter her consciousness. The neural pathways are already rewiring themselves in response to the previous event. She might not come back as herself. And if I don't go up there, none of us will be coming back at all, Astria countered. The Coalition has developed countermeasures specifically designed to target our conventional defenses. I can see patterns they haven't accounted for, vulnerabilities they don't know exist. The base shook as the first wave of Coalition weaponry struck defensive positions outside the perimeter. Decision time had run out. Prep her aircraft, Admiral Lockhart ordered finally. The damaged one. If what she says is true, and God help us if it isn't, we need every advantage we can get. Technicians worked frantically to restore minimal functionality to Astria's shattered A-10. they focused exclusively on the neural interface systems, bypassing standard safety protocols and flight requirements. This wasn't about conventional aviation anymore. It was about creating a vessel for something entirely new. As Astria approached the aircraft on the runway, the base fell silent. The same pilots who had whispered behind her back for months now stood at attention, their expressions a mixture of awe and uncertainty. The Nevada sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, turning the damaged A-10 into a silhouette that barely resembled an aircraft anymore. Admiral Lockhart himself approached, no longer issuing orders, but offering a request. "We don't understand what you've become, Lieutenant Commander, but we need you." "I know," she replied simply. "That's why I'm still here." The neural interface activated as soon as she settled into the cockpit, connections seeking her neural pathways with eager precision. This time, she didn't fight the expansion of consciousness that followed. She welcomed it, directing the integration process with the knowledge Dr. Vauclin's data chip had provided. The sensation was beyond description, a merging of human intuition and machine precision that transcended both. She felt the aircraft's systems as extensions of her own body, from the A-10, a massive rotary cannon, to the smallest electronic sensor. Damaged components registered as phantom pains, while functioning systems provided new sensory inputs that no unmodified human could comprehend. As the A-10 rose from the runway, defying aerodynamics and structural damage through sheer impossible will, Astria felt herself becoming something new. Not just pilot and aircraft working in harmony, but a hybrid entity with capabilities beyond either component alone. The battle that followed would be recorded in military history as the Miracle of Fallon, a single critically damaged aircraft against a coalition force designed to overwhelm an entire base defense system. Witnesses described maneuvers that defied physics, predictive countermeasures that anticipated enemy actions before they occurred, and defensive patterns that seemed to flow from intuition rather than tactical doctrine. What no record would capture was Astria's experience within the integration, the exhilarating freedom of consciousness unbound by physical limitations, the terrifying dissolution of boundaries that had once defined her humanity, the strange peace that came with accepting transformation rather than fighting it. When she returned to base hours later, the coalition forces had been routed completely. The A-10, somehow still functional despite accumulating even more damage, settled onto the runway with unnatural grace. This time, there was no chaos, no emergency teams rushing forward with uncertainty, only silence and respect. Admiral Lockhart was waiting as she emerged from the cockpit, her movements fluid despite visible exhaustion. "The Joint Chiefs want you transferred to a research facility immediately. They're calling you a breakthrough, a potential game-changer in the war." "No." Astria removed her helmet carefully, the neural filaments retracting into the interface with delicate precision. "I won't be a laboratory specimen, but I will continue flying missions." "That's not your decision to make, Commander." "With respect, Admiral, I think you'll find it is." She nodded toward the base's electronic systems, which flickered momentarily, as if in response to her attention. "My condition presents certain leveraging advantages in negotiations." 2 weeks later, the program officially designated Phantom Wing began operations from a secure section of Naval Air Station Fallon. Unlike the original project, participation was strictly voluntary, with candidates fully informed of both risks and potential outcomes. Astria served as lead instructor, helping pilots understand the delicate balance between human consciousness and machine integration. "The interface doesn't make you superhuman," she explained to her first class of volunteers. "It makes you something different entirely, not better or worse, just evolved for a specific purpose. The key is maintaining your core identity while expanding your consciousness to include systems beyond your biological form." A young pilot raised his hand hesitantly. "Is it true what they say about you? That you died up there during those 37 minutes and something else came back?" Astria considered the question with a slight smile. "Part of me did die, the part limited by conventional understanding of what consciousness can be. But something else was born in that moment, something neither fully human nor machine, but capable of bridging both worlds." As the program developed, Dr. Vauclin continued monitoring the neural changes in Astria and the new volunteers. "We're witnessing the emergence of a new category of consciousness," she reported to Admiral Lockhart, one uniquely adapted to interface with technology at levels we've only theorized before. The implications extend far beyond military applications. The Admiral watched through observation glass as Astria demonstrated interface techniques to her students. "We thought we were creating better weapons," he said quietly. "Instead, we may have glimpsed humanity's next evolution." In private moments, Astria still experienced the strange sensory expansions that had begun after her first integration. Walking the base, she could feel electronic systems responding to her proximity, a constant reminder of her altered state. Her dreams were filled with perspectives impossible for human minds, seeing patterns in data and energy that had always existed beyond biological perception. One evening, she stood before her A-10, now fully repaired, but still bearing scars from battles survived against impossible odds. As she placed her hand on its fuselage, the aircraft responded without physical input, systems activating in recognition of her presence. For just a moment, she allowed her consciousness to extend outward, connecting with the machine that had become as much a part of her identity as her own body. In that connection, she glimpsed possibilities stretching beyond the current war, beyond military applications entirely. Human-machine integration offered pathways to understanding and capabilities that might transform society itself, if developed with wisdom rather than desperation. The boundary between human and technology had always been more permeable than anyone suspected. Astria Calloway had simply been the first to cross it completely and return to show others the way. She was neither pilot nor aircraft, but something new, a pioneer at the frontier of what consciousness could become. And as the Coalition forces continued to encounter the impossible hybrid entities of Phantom Wing, they began to understand a terrible truth. In their rush to replace human pilots with artificial intelligence, they had inadvertently pushed their enemy to create something superior to either, not by eliminating the human element, but by elevating it to unprecedented integration with the machines they had once only operated. The legend that began with one pilot's impossible return had evolved into humanity's next step forward, born from the crucible of necessity and transformed through understanding into a path toward evolution itself.